Hello and welcome to episode 21 of Shooting the Breeze, the formal gun podcast of WaltInPA.com. And I'm here with, as I said earlier, episode 21. And if you've ever sat down and thought about a podcast, do you ever wonder what the hardest part of a podcast is? It'd be this part right here. This is the fourth time I've recorded this little intro segment, and I have no idea where to go from here because at first I tried, Christmas was yesterday, and I talk a little bit about Christmas. I thought, that sounds stupid. We'll do something else. And then, okay, let's do the origins of where Shooting the Breeze came from. That'll be a good segue. Nope, scrapped it. And the very first one was just horribly bad, and it just sounded really awkward, and it was going nowhere, so I cut it after 2 minutes. So, this is the hardest part of the podcast. This is about the fourth time that I've turned the camera on and started the show. And with this really awkward segment finished, more or less, now we can roll into the pre-news talk. And the first thing I want to talk about is some awesome information I received from Nick on Glocks, on getting into Glocks, on last week's episode of Shooting the Breeze. In the comment section, he provided a lot of content on how to kind of get into Glocks and different things that I can do with them. Because I'm still not quite sure where to go. Since the last podcast, I've thought kind of long and hard about the whole Glock thing, and I'm leaning more towards buying that Glock 17 now. And Nick provided great resources for information. For instance, how to replace the trigger connector with a butter knife and a punch instead of disassembling everything. A source for Glock factory magazines at $20 a piece with free shipping, which was awesome. I can get Smith & Wesson M&P magazines for about $30. So seeing that I can get these sometimes on sale at $18 a piece, that's very reassuring, and it's I think that's very affordable. He gave me a source for a mag holder that he is using for IDPA, a Safariland concealment holster that he's using as well. I would need an outside the waistband holster for USPSA, but he gave me a lot of information. I talked back and thanked him for all the stuff, and then he clarified and gave me some more information. So it's been a tremendous source of good, solid, new to Glock information that I thought was really beneficial to me and anyone else that may be on the fence on whether or not they want to go with a Glock. Maybe I'll try to include a link back to the older podcast in the show notes so that you can see all of the stuff that he linked to, which was really interesting, and I thought it was again just a great source of information. Speaking of those M&P magazines that are about $30 a piece, $30 a piece if you buy them from anywhere but Smith & Wesson. If you buy them from Smith & Wesson, I think they're about $42 a piece plus shipping. I mentioned in a post after the Shooting the Breeze episode that I had 3 rusty magazines. I took a picture. They looked really bad. I explained the story and how how they got that rusty, and how I was caring for them, trying to slow or stop the rust altogether. It just didn't work, and I was getting really irritated. Every time I looked at the magazines, I would just get aggravated at the fact that they were just getting more and more surface rust on them. And no matter what I did between scrubbing them down with like nylon brushes so that I wouldn't wear off the finish, and just kind of to brush out the surface rust, I was using Hobby's No. 9 solvent to try to wash out the rust along with the nylon brush, and it seemed to do a pretty good job. And then I would apply gun oil directly to the magazine and wipe it around and things like that. And I was even going through the trouble of wiping down the mags constantly after I touched them, and it just didn't help. They were I was still getting surface rust. And finally I got to the point where I got aggravated enough to pick up the phone and call Smith & Wesson. And it turns out Smith & Wesson is happy to replace them for me. I just have to send them in. And I went into their warranty information, and I requested a shipping label. I figure, if it's covered under warranty and they're gonna to replace the magazines over rust, then there's no reason why they shouldn't pay for shipping, because they pay for gun returns. So I just filled out the form, and I got a printout label to slap on a box. And now that the post office is open again, or actually I don't even need to go to the post office. It's a FedEx label. But anyway, Smith & Wesson has paid for the return shipping on the magazine, so I'll slap that on a box and get that out of here. And hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll have 3 brand new magazines. I was thinking about sending my 4th, but there really isn't much of a rust issue on that, if any at all. And I wanted to keep one handy so that I could continue to practice dry fire with speed reload drills. And I didn't want to have no magazines at all, so I kept one back. In the event that it starts developing rust, I'll ship that off to Smith & Wesson as well and have that one swapped out for a new one. With any luck, this time next year I won't be back in front of the camera beating my fist complaining about the problems I'm having with the magazines. Aside from that, one last thing before I get into the news, and that is in regards to the podcast. Earlier this week I punched in Shooting the Breeze podcast, and I was double checking the iTunes feed to make sure it was updating constantly like it should have been. And I noticed that I had a review on iTunes from Miguel over at Gun Free Zone. I thought that was really cool. And I've never asked for an iTunes review, so if you're an iTunes user and you have any interest in leaving me a review, I'd really appreciate it. Positive, negative, I really don't care one way or the other. Well, I do care one way or the other. Obviously, I'd want it to be a positive review, but if you feel as though the show is horrible and you want to leave a negative review, I'm not going to give you a hard time about that. So head on over to iTunes and type something up, click the little stars, and give me a review. It is time for the news, and because yesterday was Christmas, and the week the entire week leading up to Christmas was really busy and hectic, and I did some last minute running around, and as a result, I didn't spend much time in front of the computer. I had a lot of difficulty scrounging up both news and featured content for the podcast. I was able to come up with 2 news items. One I thought was kind of interesting. One I didn't know whether or not I wanted to share at all, just because it was kind of weird. And the featured content was sort of similar, but we're kind of going to make do with what we got, because I wasn't the only one busy throughout the week, and the content was much slower to come out than it usually is on a given week. So there was a lot less content to choose from. But I picked what I thought was the best of the bunch, and we have that for you here. So the first piece of news, which I should have opened up because I always open up the news before I start talking about the news, but I didn't this time. So let's do that now. Okay, the first piece of news comes from FederalWayMirror.com, and it is entitled Castle Doctrine and Your Right to Self-Defense from the firearms lawyer, Mark Knapp. This was published on December 23rd, and it goes on to say, remember the Craigslist murder of James Sanders in Edgewood? In that case, a local homeowner was killed by 3 men and a woman that invaded his home and terrorized his family. That case, and others like it, has people in Washington thinking about what happens before, during, and after a shooting. Many local armed citizens have attended the Firearms Academy of Seattle. Marty Hayes, a former law enforcement instructor who started the FAS facility in Onalaska, Washington, has a law degree and teaches the law of self-defense right alongside other practical aspects of shooting. Marty has been calling the legislators' attention to a 2005 Washington State Supreme Court ruling that could make it harder for armed citizens to defend ourselves in court cases involving self-defense. In the 2005 case of State versus Brightman, the defendant and another man got into a fight near Titlow Beach in Tacoma. The defendant pulled a gun during the fight and killed his opponent. Then, Brightman claimed that he shot the gun by accident. He was only trying to pistol whip the victim. The defendant made an accident. He was only trying to pistol whip the victim. Wow, I just read that same line twice. Anyway, the defendant made an unsuccessful attempt to argue self-defense in court. The Brightman court decision stated plainly that defendants claiming self-defense shouldn't also claim that their gun went off by accident. Whatever the merits of the Brightman decision, some legislators in Olympia are hoping to make Washington law more favorable for armed homeowners and less favorable to crews like the ones that committed the Craigslist murder in nearby Edgewood. Senate Bill 5418 would give Washington a castle doctrine law. There is presently no duty to retreat if you are in your home, place of business, or another place where you have the right to be. SB 5418 is important because it would create a presumption that a homeowner is justified in using deadly force to stop a home invasion. With cuts in law enforcement imminent on every side, the law stands a chance of being enacted. The law in Washington is already fairly clear when it comes to defending your home. Prosecutors in Washington are usually very careful in applying the law of self-defense in such situations. Even though you are normally on safe ground defending your home with deadly force, things can get very dicey in cases of road rage and carjackings. Unique facts are presented in each case where there is a claim of self-defense, and there are many conflicting and confusing judicial interpretations that might come to bear in any given case. Tell your lawmakers in Olympia that you would demand a law that tells criminals loudly and clearly that Washington State is not a safe place to commit violent crimes. And then at the bottom of the article, it tells you what is actually in Senate Bill 5418, and I'm not going to read the legalese because it's legalese and I'll wind up tripping all over it. So with that said, kind of an interesting article. You know, here in Pennsylvania, we just recently had Castle Doctrine pass, and it was kind of a long time coming. You know, just as you would imagine, when it was being voted on and things like that, you had anti-screaming that there'd be blood on the streets, and the most common one was that the most common argument from the antis was that, you know, you're going to have rival gangs, you know, shooting it out on the street, and because there is no duty to retreat, you know, the guy left standing is going to claim self-defense and he's going to walk because of this castle doctrine. And you know, it was just complete bull. It was absolute bogus because in the wording of the law it says that you can't be in the act of committing a crime or some verbiage similar to that. So if you're committing a crime, the castle doctrine really doesn't apply to you. But more importantly, and more important to me as far as the castle doctrine was concerned, in our case, was taking away the civil liability or the civil endangerment of a self-defense situation. So, for instance, if someone was breaking into my home and I shot them, they survived, the ambulance came, took them away, the burglar could turn around and sue me because he hurt himself while attempting to rob my home. In the event that he died, you know, his family could potentially sue me for, you know, like wrongful death or something like that. And the castle doctrine here came in and said, you know, that we're going to take away that civil issue, and that was kind of peace of mind to me. Not having the duty to retreat in more situations was a plus too, but I'm a real big fan of these castle doctrine laws. This one seems, well, again, this is a very small snippet. If this is the entire thing, it's there's not a whole lot to it, but you know, reading over this, it seems like fairly common sense stuff. And it was kind of an interesting article nonetheless. And actually, the second news piece I have involves the Pennsylvania castle doctrine, so let's roll into that one. The second and final piece of news I have for you in this podcast actually came from browsing my Twitter feed. One of the local news stations that I follow on Twitter posted a link to this, and I thought it was kind of interesting. So I clicked through and I read it. This comes from Philly.com, and it is entitled DA, 2 shot in rural Montco came armed with bats. This was published on December 19th. It goes on to say, a man and his son who were shot Saturday night in a rural hilly corner of Montgomery County had come looking for a fight, authorities said Monday. Joshua Levin, 34, and his adopted son, Zachary Levin, 19, of Bartow, Berks County, had brought baseball bats to a split-level house on Snyder Road in Upper Frederick Township, and didn't back down when faced with a loaded handgun. Zachary Levin, a student at Boyertown Area Senior High School, was fatally shot, and Joshua Levin was wounded in the arm. Montgomery County District Attorney Risa Veltri Furman said in a news release. The resident who was not identified allegedly had gotten into an argument with his girlfriend, who is also Joshua Levin's wife, and she called Levin to come and get her, Furman said. When the Levins arrived, Furman said they were wielding an aluminum baseball bat and a small wooden replica bat. The resident, Furman said, retreated to his Ford pickup truck, retrieved a Ruger 40 caliber semi-automatic handgun he legally owned, and tried to back the Levins off. But the gun didn't seem to faze the men, who continued to poke the resident and hit his truck, eventually trapping him, Furman said. The resident allegedly struck Joshua Levin in the front of his head with the handgun to back him off, Furman said. Still, they advanced. After Zachary Levin allegedly hit the resident, the man fired and struck him in the chest. While Joshua Levin was poised with the bat, Furman said, the resident shot him in the arm. The shooter, after taking away the bat, called 911, Furman said. Furman said a neighbor recalled hearing a loud exchange and a person threatening to call police. A second person responded to the first person saying, "Go ahead and call the police," she said in the news release. Neighbors in the wooded neighborhood told the Daily News on Sunday night that they hadn't noticed the incident until police arrived. The DA's office is investigating whether the homicide was justifiable. The shooter was questioned and released. Furman's release said the case may fall under the Stand Your Ground provision of the Castle Doctrine Act that took effect in August. Under the current Castle Doctrine, a person has the legal right to use force if he believes such force is necessary to protect himself from death or serious bodily injury. The person shot displayed a weapon capable of deadly use, and the shooter is not engaged in criminal activity, Furman said. Under the new law, a shooter has no duty to retreat in most circumstances. So this has like weird written all over it. I mean, I'm trying to choose my words really, really carefully because I don't want to come off sounding really bad. But this sounds like something you would expect to hear went down in a trailer park. You've got, one guy who's dating some other guy's wife. They get into an argument. She calls her husband. Her husband and adopted son come out with bats and confront the boyfriend. And then this whole thing goes down. They're threatening the guy. He pulls a gun. They're still threatening him. He whacks one of them in the head with the gun. They still don't back down. He shoots them. And it kind of ends there. One guy dies, or the younger kid dies, who goes to high school, and the other guy gets shot in the arm. And it's just like it's just a really strange situation. And saying that this is the case is going to fall under the Stand Your Ground provision of the Castle Doctrine, which is interesting because I don't know how many other incidents have been kind of put underneath that Castle Doctrine law to date. I should probably look into it, but this is the first one that I've heard of since the Castle Doctrine went into effect. So I don't know how this is going to be spun, whether you're going to start seeing news reports of, see what happens with this Castle Doctrine, these, guys, these guys, one guy dating another guy's wife, and the fight breaks out, and people end up shot, and this guy walks away scot-free. So I could totally see that coming across the news one evening, but kind of a really strange and interesting news article. So I guess the news in this episode can kind of get chalked up to one kind of interesting piece on potential legislation coming down the pike for Washington, and one really weird fight involving a gun in Pennsylvania. And that's going to do it for the news. Well, before I get started with the featured content, I just want to kind of touch on that comment I made about the trailer park. And if you live in a trailer park and you took offense to that, I apologize. However, ask yourself this. Did that story not sound like it would be featured on an episode of Jerry Springer? Or did it not sound like something you would see on an episode of My Name is Earl? And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And we'll roll right into the featured content portion of the show. As I've said many times before, the objective of the featured content portion of the podcast is to basically talk a little bit about a topic that I found on another blog and get you to click the link and visit the other blog. I'm not going to read it to you word for word like I do with the news. I want you to go check out this other stuff because there are lots of great gun blogs out there, and the more I can talk about them and get you clicking on different links, the more time you'll spend at these blogs that I really enjoy. So with that said, the first piece of, actually this is going to be a Gun Free Zone featured content fest. I just noticed that both pieces of featured content come from Gun Free Zone. Much like the news, it was kind of slim pickings this week, and I went with 2 articles from Gun Free Zone. The second one but it isn't Gun Free Zone related stuff. But at any rate, the first is called "It Is All in the Mindset, 2 Cases to Study," which I thought was really, really interesting. This is the type of writing that I wish I saw more often on various gun blogs. You know, seeing bloggers talk about politics and stuff is cool, or to see them post different information about new guns or new optics or new accessories and things like that are really cool. You know, I appreciate that kind of stuff, but this is the style of writing that I really get into. If I felt more comfortable with my gun knowledge and things like that and gun politics, this is something that I would want to do myself. And basically, this is just kind of a case study. Miguel looks at 2 different gun scenarios. One, in the first scenario, there's a clerk. He's behind the counter in a store, and there's a guy that walks in, and he decides he's going to rob the store. He throws a liquid in the guy's face. The guy kind of covers up, and as the guy's walking around the counter to confront him, he recovers. And, you know, he gets in a fighting posture. He's ready to defend himself, and then he just kind of gives up, and his will collapses like that. And the guy proceeds to beat him with a hammer. And after he's finished beating him with a hammer, he takes the money and leaves. And, you know, Miguel talks about how the victim addressed the situation, and how things may have gone differently if he'd pushed forward and continued to defend himself instead of just kind of getting that posture and then getting into a defensive position where his hands were up over his head. The second case is really interesting because there's this purse snatcher who's armed, and he goes to steal a woman's purse. The woman is in her 60s. She and her 81-year-old mother and a friend were in a vehicle in the driveway. So this guy comes up and he tries to take the daughter's purse. The 81-year-old mother gets out of the car and gets aggressive. She starts pelting this bad guy in the head with her purse, and he eventually runs off. You know, without the purse. He gives up because someone's putting up a fight. And I thought it was really interesting to look at both scenarios where you have someone that's younger who's capable of defending themselves, and they kind of shut down in the moment of stress. I mean, I would like to think that I would be able to defend myself, but you know, you never know what's going to happen until, you know, the time comes. But it's a really interesting look at, you know, it's really interesting to compare the 2 situations where, you know, you have the younger guy who's able to defend himself, and then you have the older woman who you would never think would stand up to an attacker, and she's there swinging her purse. And you see the outcome of both. You know, the one where you wouldn't expect the one woman to defend herself winds up running the criminal off. And I thought it was a really interesting comparison between the 2. So head over to Gun Free Zone. Look at all of the security camera pictures from the attack. I think there's also some video here if you're interested in watching this guy get beat with a hammer. I wasn't. I was happy. I was content with looking at the still shots, and look at how the two scenarios compare. So I thought it was really interesting. Head over to Gun Free Zone and check it out. For the second and final piece of featured content, I want to talk a little bit about something I saw on Gun Free Zone, although Miguel is not where I got all of the information from. He was just the first person I found with information on this topic when I went looking for some sort of source to talk about or to feature. And that is the whole red jacket thing that's really turned up recently. Now, the first person that the first source that I saw this information from was Mark Vanderberg from the Gun Rights Radio Network. He had posted on Facebook that he came across this information on Sons of Guns and Red Jacket Firearms. However, he was unsure about how authentic the information was, or how reliable the information was, because it was coming from TMZ, which is a sort of a celebrity gossip news website. And I clicked through and I read it, and it seemed kind of interesting. And throughout the course of the day, more and more information were popping up, or was popping up, on different forums and different blogs and things like that. And if you followed along, you could piece together the story, and it's kind of like it's a story of a non-story. It turns out that let's first talk about the featured content post, and that is Sons of Guns Never Trust Reality TV from Gun Free Zone. That's the one I'm crediting here. It's fairly short, and basically it just says, according to TMZ, the Haydens did not have an FFL because they had some trouble back in 2009, and Miguel speculates as to where the problem could have arisen, or could have come from. And as I was reading this whole thing more and more on different sites, and I think I found the bulk of the information on like AR15.com or something. There was a link to it. And basically it's a story about a non-story. It seems as though in 2009 the Haydens had an issue with their FFL, their license. They had some kind of ATF audit, and 10 guns weren't accounted for. And from what I'm reading, it seems as though they were able to circumvent incarceration and just give up their license. And in doing so, they couldn't run or own the business. And as a result, Red Jacket Firearms LLC was registered with 3 FFL holders as sort of the owners of the company. I believe one was Vince, one was Joe, and I don't recall who the third license holder was. But at any rate, Will and his daughter Stephanie were employees of the company, and that's certainly not the way it is portrayed on the TV show. Well, anyway, this whole thing goes on throughout the television show and things like that. As you know, the Sons of Guns is portrayed as it's Will Hayden's business, and you know, it's run, and kind of right below him is Stephanie, his daughter, and it's a Hayden business. Well, you know, if you look up like public FFL information for Red Jacket Firearms, neither of the Haydens are listed, and it's all of these other people that hold the licenses and kind of own the company, or do own the company, as it seems. And I say it's a story of a non-story because it really isn't. None of this has gone down since the TV show has aired. The only thing that has changed is Vince has decided to leave Red Jacket Firearms and start his own business. I don't remember what it's called, but basically, I guess the news got out that Vince left and was starting his own gig, and you know, someone found some information on, you know, I guess ownership transferring or Vince being bought out or something, and it was kind of a media explosion on the gossip site, and you know, among gun blogs and forums and things like that. So it's kind of interesting because it kind of sheds a light of truth on a situation where the production crew are clearly making it out as though Will and Stephanie are the owners and run the show, when kind of behind the scenes, according to documentation, they're just employees. So kind of interesting. You know, there was something else I wanted to say on the subject, but I don't remember what it was. Oh, there was, I guess at some point there was some bickering back and forth between Vince and Stephanie or something on Facebook, and comments were being deleted and things like that. And by the time I got around to clicking the link, I have no idea where those comments were buried, if they still existed, and I just had no desire to read through all of the stuff that were on both Facebook pages. So supposedly there was some back and forth, and there were some screen captures and copy and paste jobs of what was going on Facebook. So as far as Sons of Guns, the television show, goes, this seems as though it's not going to affect them whatsoever. Will and Stephanie still don't hold an FFL from the way it seems, and it's going to make no difference that Vince is left. And apparently it seems as though he's getting a little frustrated because, you know, apparently the show, in an interview I heard with Will Hayden on the NRA blog, or on NRA News, was that filming, there was a very, very little gap between seasons as far as he was concerned. The film crew really just kind of picked up at the end of the season and kept running with it, and that long delay was just them recording a bunch of stuff. So there's a big lag in between what was recorded and today, and I guess Vince is getting a little frustrated in waiting for the story to be told. I guess he's got some sort of gag order in place or something, contractually obligated to keep his mouth shut as to not ruin the television show or something. And I guess there's some frustrations that are popping up. So, kind of interesting. If you want to start reading on this subject, head over to Gun Free Zone, click the link that Miguel provides, and then from there you'll probably wind up clicking on a bunch of other links and Googling a bunch of stuff, and you'll see that this thing just grows proportionally and just gets enormous with different snippets of news and different sources and all over the place. So it's kind of interesting, but then again, it's just kind of drama, and that's kind of where it starts and ends. It's TV drama. Well, this show is kind of rolling along. I just looked at the timeline, and I'm at about 31 minutes in. I should get this thing wrapped up in well under an hour. So let's just keep on rolling. This part of the show is the cigar and drink pairing of the episode, and this is kind of interesting. The cigar I was really, really excited about, but I'm having some construction issues with it, and the drink that I'm pairing this with is brand new to me. And before I tell you what it is or show you what I have to show you, I got to tell you where I got this from. I have a sample of bourbon, and I got it, I don't know whether it was last week or a week and a half ago, something like that. I got an email from the Badish Group, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but I believe they're a marketing firm out of New York. I've talked to them before about stuff on Stogie Review, and I get this email, and I don't remember who it came from, but it was someone higher up in the company, and they asked me if I'd be interested in trying a sample of this bourbon that they are, I don't know whether they're promoting or something, but they asked me if I'd be interested in pairing with my cigars this Four Roses single barrel bourbon. And I thought, yeah, sure, I'm not going to turn down a sample of booze, so yeah, sure, send it away, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Just do me a favor and provide some information about the product so that I can kind of talk about it when I pair it with cigars. And a few days go by and I get the sample in the mail, and it's the strangest thing. I've never ever received a sample like this before. In sort of like a little kind of plastic specimen bottle of sorts was 100 milliliters of Four Roses single barrel bourbon. It's just a clear container with a big, hard plastic cap. It's graduated on the back in milliliters, in increments of 25 milliliters, and they just kind of poured Four Roses into the bottle, 100 milliliters, and slapped a sticker on it that said Four Roses sample, 100 milliliters, and dropped it in the mail, along with a CD of information on the product. And I thought it was really, really strange that I got a sample like this. I've never gotten liquor samples in the mail before. I don't know whether it's whether it has to be done this way due to liquor laws or anything like that, but it was the strangest thing. I got it and I almost didn't want to try it. I opened the cap and I smelled it and I thought, okay, it smells like bourbon. It doesn't smell like poison or anything dangerous. So I guess I'll give it a try. And I was kind of hesitant, and I waited until it was time to do this episode, and I poured 50 milliliters into a glass, and that's what I'm pairing with a cigar. Now, there are a couple of different Four Roses bourbons. This one is the single barrel, and pricing on it seems to be all over the place. Because I live in Pennsylvania, we have high taxes on liquor, and it's state mandated pricing. So we generally pay a lot more than people in other states. To my surprise, people in California pay a lot less on booze than we do. I mean, I've got a friend who was telling me before that a bottle of Zaya cost him something along the lines of $25 or $30, and here in Pennsylvania, it's $40 a bottle. It's amazing the difference. I thought California had really high liquor taxes and things like that. So I really can't tell you with any certainty what you would expect to pay for it. I did a Google product search, and it's turning up anywhere from like $25 a bottle up to $40 a bottle for the single barrel stuff. And, you know, some of the shipping charges are kind of expensive. They seem like $15 for shipping and stuff like that. The tasting notes are kind of interesting. They talk about like citrus flavors. I think they say there's a molasses note in there. It seems like a really interesting bourbon. It's 100 proof, and it's one of the most interesting bourbons I've ever had. You know, you take a little sip, there's an explosion of flavor. It's really intense. It's complex, it's interesting. There's a lot going on in the palate. And then a couple seconds go by, completely gone. You get this little warm, you know, kind of burn going down your chest. I mean, it's 100 proof, so obviously you're going to get that alcohol burn. But it's the most amazing thing where it's really intense and flavorful for a couple of seconds, and then it's just completely gone. I've never had a bourbon that has done that before. It leaves the palate really crisp and clean, and it's just amazing that it doesn't linger any longer than a few seconds. So I'm impressed with it, and I'm going to go looking for a bottle so that I can have more than 100 milliliters in a little sample. But the cigar that I'm pairing it with is probably one that I should be drinking coffee with, and that is the Undercrown by Drew Estate. I mentioned earlier that I'm having some difficulties with it construction-wise. I'm having a bit of a tunneling problem where the center tobacco is burning at a faster rate than the outside tobacco, and as a result, the smoke volume is kind of goofy. It seems really airy. I'm not getting a whole lot out of it. I'm constantly knocking the ash off the cigar and touching it up. It's obviously a bum stick, and I say it's obviously a bum stick because everything should be burning consistently, and I'm not quite sure why this one is burning the way it is. It could be a construction flaw. It could be a humidity issue, but from the source, Buckhead Cigar, I really don't see this being a humidity issue or a shipping issue or anything like that. I've got plenty of cigars from Mike before, and other cigars in the package with this one I have not had any issues with, so I think this one is just kind of a bum stick. But the interesting thing about this cigar is that it's not what you generally expect. It is an offshoot of the Liga Privada number 9. Now, Drew Estate is known for their infused cigars. Acid is very popular, and the Liga Privada line is a non-flavored / non-infused line that has, the raw tobacco kind of flavor over flavored stuff, or artificially flavored tobacco. And it was usually popular. It's kind of expensive, but really, really popular. A lot of people love them. I'm a big fan of the Liga Privada line. I really like the T52, and the number 9 is really growing on me. But what's really interesting about the Liga Privada line is that when you see a typical cigar, you see the makeup of a typical cigar. It may have a Nicaraguan wrapper, Nicaraguan binder, and a blend of fillers from Nicaragua and Honduras. So you get like 2 countries of origin, maybe 3 countries of origin. Some cigars you might get 4 countries of origin, mixing it up. The Liga Privada line uses 7 different countries of origin, and when I first saw that, I thought, wow, this is kind of a hodgepodge of tobacco, and it's really, really strange, and I'm not going to like it. Well, it turns out that I really enjoyed the cigar, and the Undercrown came to be because the Liga Privada was so popular, they were having difficulties supplying it, and in an effort to continue to supply the cigar, they created an offshoot brand or blend in the Undercrown, which uses different primings of the same tobacco that go into the Liga Privada, and they use a San Andreas Maduro wrapper on it. So similar, I should say, the same components, different priming, different wrapper, and you've got the Undercrown. And just glancing at the clock, it's like 8.5 minutes, and I'm babbling way too much about this cigar and drink thing. So it's not going entirely well. cigar and drink wise. For one, I wish the cigar were burning a bit better, and two, this is more of a coffee cigar. I think San Andreas wrapper, it's not my favorite Maduro wrapper. I think it's a little lackluster in the flavor department, but I think coffee brings it out a bit more. So, you know, of all the episodes I've done where I'm drinking coffee with cigars, this is probably the one where I should be drinking coffee, but I'm drinking booze. The Four Roses is definitely thumbs up. I really like the stuff. And the cigar, I was really, really excited, but I only got one Undercrown, and I kind of wish that I wasn't having burn issues, because it seems like a really intense, flavorful cigar, but I can't get much because the smoke volume is so all over the place. Sometimes I get a mouthful of dense smoke and it's really flavorful, and other times it's like airy and very lackluster. So before I hit 10 minutes of babbling about cigars and booze on a gun podcast, I'm going to end it there. So if you're interested in trying the Undercrown by Drew Estate, you can get in touch with my preferred retailer, which is Mike over at Buckhead Cigar in Atlanta, Georgia. If you would like to pick up the phone and give Mike a call and order a 5-pack, you can do so by calling 404-844-0400. You can head over to AskTheCigarGuys.com. I believe the Undercrown is listed there as items on sale, and you can get box and 5-pack pricing. Or you can get in touch with Mike on Twitter at Buckhead Cigar, and he's also on Google Plus and Facebook as Buckhead Cigar. So support a fellow cigar guy, a fellow gun guy, and my preferred retailer. Well, so much for saying the podcast is just rolling right along. I just rewatched that whole last segment on the cigar and drink pairing, and I really got gabby there. I did forget to mention that the singles of this cigar from Buckhead are $8.95 a piece plus tax. So for what it's worth, there's single pricing, and if you're looking for 5-pack or box pricing, head over to AskTheCigarGuys.com. As far as the discussion topic of the episode goes, last week I got a comment from Corey on episode 20 with a couple of questions. I answered the bulk of the questions via comment, and I held off on the last one because I thought, well, you know, there's something beefy enough that I could talk about it on the episode. And basically Corey asked me how I decide on what gun I'm going to purchase next. You know, is there, you know, do I have a scale saying, you know, need versus want, and, you know, how do I judge what I'm going to purchase next? And there is kind of a scale as to what I go by. A few guns ago, I don't remember how many, not very many, but a few guns ago I went out looking for a range gun. I had a concealed carry gun. I wasn't completely happy with it, but I wanted something that was more affordable to shoot and was geared more towards time at the range and not time on my hip. And I wound up buying a Smith & Wesson M&P. It's the gun that I use for USPSA. It is the gun that I take to the range all the time. It's the gun that I shoot by far most frequently. And there was a long span in between when I bought that gun and when I bought my next one. And throughout that time frame, I started thinking, you know, I really enjoy shooting this M&P. I wish I had something that I could shoot, that I would enjoy shooting as much as this M&P, but were a bit more comfortable to carry. At the time, I was carrying a Beretta Model 70S. It was an old gun. It was really accurate. I thought it was a great gun. It was just really expensive to shoot, being .380. And because it was made so long ago, there aren't holsters made for it. So in a generic holster, it was like carrying a brick around on my hip. It was painful sitting in the car for more than a few minutes, and just walking around, I constantly felt the thing riding up out of my belt. And, you know, in that situation, when it came time to buy another gun, that's where I was looking. I want something that's more of a pleasure to shoot and is going to be more comfortable to carry. And I wound up going with a Springfield XD. And after buying that gun, when it was time to purchase my next gun, I was kind of looking at what I had so far. Okay, I've got a range gun. I've got a toy gun, or I don't want to say a toy gun because it is very deadly, in the Beretta Model 70S. That is more of a kind of a range novelty or a range toy these days. And for concealed carry, I have a Springfield XD. You know, what do I have, or what gaps do I need to fill with the next gun? And I thought, you know, it would be really nice to have something that I could slip into my pocket. So maybe I'll start looking at a pocket pistol. They're a bit more affordable. It won't be such a big hit to my wallet. And, you know, I really got to thinking, you know, with a pocket pistol, I'll be able to carry a gun when I can't carry a gun, more or less. And when I say that, I don't mean to imply that I'm breaking the law or anything. I just don't want to blurt out why I purchased this particular gun, you know, for public ears. It is not for illegal activity, but it is something that may be frowned upon by certain individuals and by certain handbooks. But that's kind of the as far as I'm going to go with it. So that next gun was filling a need. Now I have a range gun, a novelty gun of sorts, a concealed carry gun, and a deep concealment pocket carry gun. And now I'm kind of in the position where I've scraped together a little bit of money, and, you know, I've sold off some other hobbies to make way for new hobbies, and now I'm looking for another gun. It's in the coming months I'll be looking at another gun. And, you know, it comes down to, okay, before I just decide I'm going to go out and buy this gun, I need to kind of look at what I have, what I need, and what I want. And at this point, I really don't need anything. The pocket pistol and my Springfield XD cover the carry department. I'm very comfortable with both, with carrying both. I'm comfortable with what they're capable of doing. I'm comfortable with the capacity, the ballistics. You know, I'm comfortable with all that stuff. So, you know, now that the need part is taken care of, now we can kind of look at, what do I want? Well, I kind of want a snub nose, like Smith & Wesson J-frame that I can slip in a jacket pocket, but I don't wear a lot of jackets. I mean, I don't really wear a jacket unless it's wintertime here in Pennsylvania, and it's more of a coat. I wear sweatshirts and hoodies and stuff in the place of a jacket in a lot of cases. So the Smith & Wesson J-frame would be one of those guns that's nice to have, but I don't really need it. So again, I kind of look more towards the want column, and the next gun I want is a backup pistol for USPSA, and I'm really leaning towards that Glock 17. So there's no real magical formula or complex way I do this. I just kind of look at what my day-to-day needs are, and how a gun fits into those day-to-day needs. And if I don't need anything, then I kind of look at, you know, what do I want? And at this point, I want a backup pistol in 9mm, full size, to be able to use at USPSA matches. In next season, I want to shoot more. Ideally, I would like to shoot 2 matches a month. It gets really expensive. Typically, I buy 250 rounds for a match. I don't use all of those rounds, but I typically buy 250 rounds of Remington UMC, a mega pack, for a given match, which is about $65, and then registration fees for these matches are about $20. And, you know, with the finances in my home changing rather drastically over the past couple of months, or probably the last 2 months to be a little more precise, you know, that money is really not there to be able to shoot lots of matches in the course of a month. So realistically, I could probably shoot 1 match a month next season. However, if I get into reloading, which I'm strongly considering, I could probably squeak in 2 matches, and maybe on a good month, 3 matches. But at this point in time, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for 2 matches a month next season. And doing that much shooting, I want to have something waiting in the wings if anything happens with my primary gun. At this point, the primary is the Smith & Wesson M&P. If I like the Glock 17 as much as I think I might, it may become my primary. So at this point, I'm just looking for a backup pistol with the potential to become a primary for range use and USPSA shooting. I also kind of want to get into a little bit of IDPA next season. So, you know, maybe I'll kind of flip-flop and do maybe one USPSA match, 1 IDPA, depending on how things work out with finances and things like that. So that is more or less the discussion of the episode, and that's how I determine what gun I'm going to purchase next. And, you know, it's probably worth saying that I don't buy a lot of guns. There's usually several months in between gun purchases. Let's see. There was probably more than a year between when I purchased my Springfield XD and when I purchased my Smith & Wesson Bodyguard. And between my M&P and the Springfield XD, there was probably another, I don't know, it was probably 8 to 12 months. So we're looking at maybe a gun a year. So that's not a lot of purchases. It's a considerable amount of cash in the grand scheme of things, but that's just kind of how I determine what I'm buying next. Well, it's about time to wrap up the episode, and I guess I spoke too soon as far as I'll be well under an hour with this one. I got kind of gabby, and we're looking at about 51 minutes or so at this point. So with that said, it's about time to wrap this up. And I want to thank you for watching episode 21 of Shooting the Breeze, the formal gun podcast of WaltInPA.com. If you have any questions or you want to talk about something you saw on the show or correct me if I misspoke, you can do so in a variety of ways. I'm available via email at walt@waltinpa.com. I'm on Twitter as @WaltW. I'm on Google Plus and Facebook as Walt White. And I'd appreciate it if you have any questions or anything that you would like me to talk about on the show. For instance, if you want to submit a question of some sort, I would really appreciate that. I thought it was really cool that Corey was able to give me an idea to do a little more content on the show, and that worked out really well. So if you would like to do the same, or you want to submit an audio comment or anything like that, or video comment, just email it to me or send me a note on Twitter or Facebook or Google Plus, and let me know what you think. So with that said, again, thank you for watching episode 21 of Shooting the Breeze, and I will catch you later.